Chapter 7. Fractured Paths. Dawn light spilled through the tower windows, casting long shadows across the chamber floor. The three of them, Lyra still clutching the moon opal, Cassius regaining his strength, and Zara standing vigilant by the door, remained locked in momentary silence as they considered their next steps. Cassius was the first to break it, his scholarly precision returning despite his evident exhaustion.
"There's another complication we need to address,"
he said, his violet eyes meeting Lyra's directly.
"My official assignment as diplomatic envoy concludes today."
"What?"
Lyra's voice betrayed more emotion than she'd intended, the sudden announcement catching her off guard.
"But..."
"I was commissioned specifically to investigate the ancestral warning and oversee the engagement ceremony,"
he explained gently.
"Both tasks are now technically complete. Your father will expect my final report and formal departure by day's end."
The moon opal pulsed once in Lyra's palm, as if responding to her sudden spike of anxiety. The thought of Cassius leaving, especially now, with the entity temporarily contained but far from defeated, sent a cold wave of fear through her that had nothing to do with the necklace's influence.
"You can't just leave,"
she said, the words emerging with unexpected intensity.
"Not with everything that's happening. Not with..."
She stopped herself, uncertain how to articulate the complex web of connections that had formed between them in such a short time. Understanding softened his expression as he reached forward slowly, his fingers barely brushing the fire opals at her throat.
"A part of me will always be with you,"
he said quietly.
"no matter the physical distance between us."
The gentle touch sent a curious warmth through her. Not the invasive heat of the necklace's enchantment, but something more natural, more authentic. For the first time since Alek had fastened it around her neck, the jewelry felt more like a connection than a constraint.
"What will you tell my father?"
Lyra asked, practical concerns surfacing through emotional turbulence.
"That depends on what you want me to say."
Cassius replied simply.
"I can report exactly what we've discovered about Alek's bargain with the Ifrit, which would likely end your engagement immediately, but create significant political ramifications. Or I can deliver a more measured assessment, confirming only the ancestral warning while leaving specific details unaddressed."
Zara moved closer, her protective instincts clearly engaged.
"Telling the High Councilor everything would free Lyra from this arrangement, wouldn't it? Surely that's worth whatever political fallout might follow."
But Lyra's analytical mind was already calculating broader implications, considering factors beyond her personal situation.
"If my father acted directly against Alek based on accusations of forbidden spirit bargains, it would create open conflict between our houses,"
she said slowly.
"The Inferno Circle has significant support within the guild. Civil division would weaken the Fire Guild's position against other elemental factions."
"And potentially rush whatever larger plan Alek has set in motion,"
Cassius added, nodding appreciation for her strategic thinking even in crisis.
"We still don't fully understand why he sought this specific connection to your ancestral line."
Lyra touched the necklace thoughtfully, feeling the moon opal's cool presence in her other hand, a counterbalance to the fire opal's persistent energy.
"Give my father enough information to raise serious concerns without forcing immediate confrontation,"
she decided.
"Create space for investigation rather than accusation."
"A measured approach,"
Cassius agreed, his violet eyes reflecting respect for her strategic assessment.
"I'll return to the Spirit Guild afterward to consult our archives about Ifrit bargains and potential countermeasures. It will take several days, but I'll come back as soon as possible."
The promise should have provided reassurance. Yet Lyra found herself oddly fixated on the several days of absence rather than the certain return. After their shared ordeal in the necklace's realm, the prospect of separation, even temporary, created an unexpected hollow sensation beneath her ribs.
You'll be all right.
Cassius said softly, clearly reading her unspoken concern.
The moon opal maintains our connection even at distance. My fragment within the necklace will continue protecting you from the entity's influence, and your own strength is greater than you realize.
His confidence in her capabilities warmed something within Lyra that had grown cold during months of political maneuvering and familial expectations. Not empty flattery or calculated manipulation, but genuine recognition of her resilience. Perception of strength she herself sometimes overlooked.
I'll be here too.
Zara added firmly.
Whatever happens in the coming days, you won't face it alone.
Lyra nodded gratitude, momentarily unable to trust her voice. The suddenness of their changed circumstances, from desperate soul extraction to strategic planning in mere hours, left emotional responses struggling to align with intellectual understanding.
I should prepare for my meeting with the High Councilor,
Cassius said, moving carefully from the bed to stand. Despite the moon opal's assistance, his movements betrayed lingering exhaustion from soul fragmentation. A subtle unsteadiness quickly masked by practiced control.
And I should make myself presentable,
Lyra acknowledged, looking down at the hastily draped robe covering her otherwise nude form.
If questions arise about last night's festivities, we need plausible explanations ready.
Ritual purification exhaustion,
Zara suggested immediately.
Half the brides in Pyreholm history have rested through the morning after engagement ceremonies. No one will question it, especially given your father's awareness of certain irregularities during the ritual.
The practical solution aligned perfectly with established tradition, while buying necessary time to formulate a more comprehensive strategy. This was why having allies made such a difference, Lyra realized. Not just emotional support, but practical assistance from those whose skills complemented her own.
We'll reconvene after my meeting with your father,
Cassius said, moving toward the door with deliberate steadiness that couldn't quite hide his physical strain.
Maintain the moon opal's contact as much as possible. It strengthens both our connection and my fragment's resistance within the necklace.
He paused at the threshold, violet eyes meeting hers once more with an expression that carried multiple layers beneath its surface calm. Concern, determination, and something deeper she wasn't prepared to name. Then, with a formal bow that somehow managed to convey more personal meaning than its ceremonial execution warranted, he departed. The moment the door closed behind him, Lyra felt a curious emptiness in the chamber, despite Zara's continued presence. As if some essential energy had withdrawn along with Cassius's physical form. The sensation made no logical sense, yet persisted with undeniable reality, leaving her momentarily adrift between conflicting awareness of necessary separation and unwelcome absence.
Well,
Zara said after a brief silence, her practical nature asserting itself.
that was certainly a significant look.
He's concerned about leaving with the situation unresolved.
Lyra replied automatically, avoiding the obvious implication in her friend's observation. Zara's eyebrow rose with eloquent skepticism.
Is that what we're calling it? Concern?
Heat rose in Lyra's cheeks that had nothing to do with the necklace's influence.
Whatever exists between us is complicated by current circumstances.
She said carefully, rising to begin preparing for the day ahead.
Professional collaboration in crisis doesn't necessarily translate to anything else.
Of course not.
Zara agreed with exaggerated solemnity.
Soul fragmentation to protect you from spiritual entities is perfectly standard diplomatic protocol. I'm sure he does it for all his official assignments.
The gentle mockery carried affectionate understanding rather than judgment, offering Lyra an opportunity to acknowledge unspoken realities without formal declaration. Yet something within her resisted even this private admission. Caution born from years navigating political relationships, where vulnerability inevitably became weakness to be exploited.
We should focus on immediate priorities.
She redirected, moving to her wardrobe to select appropriate attire.
Preparing explanations for my absence from last night's celebrations. Managing Alek's expectations for this evening. Developing strategy for the coming days while Cassius consults Spirit Guild archives.
Zara's expression softened with comprehension.
All right.
She agreed, moving to assist with practical preparations.
But at some point, Lyra, you might consider that some emotions don't become weaker when acknowledged. Sometimes they grow stronger through recognition.
The observation lingered between them, neither pursued nor dismissed as they turned to immediate tasks of preparing Lyra for public appearance. The necklace remained silent against her throat, its usual invasive heat noticeably absent, testament to Cassius's fragment successfully containing the entity's influence. Yet even without the necklace's magical manipulation, Lyra found her thoughts repeatedly returning to moments from their brief but intense connection. The sanctuary working where their magics had resonated with unexpected harmony. His respectful restraint when circumstances necessitated physical contact. His willing sacrifice to extract her soul from the entity's domain. Each memory carried emotional weight disproportionate to its brief occurrence, suggesting significance beyond temporary alliance against common threat. The implications both attracted and alarmed her. The possibility of connection transcending professional collaboration, counterbalanced by awareness of its practical impossibility within existing guild structures. As she dressed in formal attire, appropriate for the day after her engagement ceremony, Lyra touched the moon opal in her pocket, feeling its cool energy respond immediately to her contact. Through it, she sensed a distant awareness of Cassius, not direct communication, but a general impression of his continued existence. His maintained connection despite physical separation.
You know,
Zara observed as she helped arrange Lyra's flame-red hair in an appropriate style.
this all reminds me of something your father once said about your mother.
Lyra looked up in surprise. Her mother, who had died when she was barely 5, was rarely mentioned in the Embersong household, the subject carefully avoided by her father through decades of single parenthood.
What do you mean?
It was years ago, during some festival celebration,
Zara explained, her fingers working deftly through Lyra's thick locks.
He'd had more ceremonial wine than usual, and I overheard him tell Elder Kalina that true magical resonance couldn't be arranged through political alignment, that it happened organically or not at all.
The revelation startled Lyra both for its content and its source. Her father's public position had always emphasized beneficial alliances over personal affinity, political advantage over individual preference. That he might privately hold a different perspective suggested complexity she hadn't previously attributed to his calculated approach to relationships.
He was talking about my mother.
she asked quietly. Zara nodded, securing a final pin in Lyra's elegant arrangement.
He said finding genuine magical compatibility was like discovering a previously unknown constellation, rare enough that most mages settled for manufactured alignment instead.
Something in the description resonated deeply with Lyra's recent experiences, particularly the unprecedented harmony she had discovered with Cassius despite supposedly incompatible elemental affinities. Their magical signatures had aligned with natural ease that contradicted everything guild doctrine taught about necessary separation between fire and spirit practitioners.
Why are you telling me this now?
She asked, studying her friend's reflection in the mirror.
Because you have your mother's portrait in that cabinet.
Zara replied simply, gesturing toward an ornate wooden chest rarely opened.
And every time I've seen you look at it, I recognize the same expression you had watching Cassius leave your chamber this morning.
The observation landed with unexpected impact, connecting threads Lyra herself hadn't consciously assembled. Her mother, Lyra Embersong, had been an unconventional fire mage known for integrating techniques from other elements, particularly spirit guild meditation practices that enhanced her exceptional flame control. A historical similarity to Lyra's own research interests that suddenly carried new significance in light of recent discoveries.
That's...
Lyra began, unsure how to respond to insight that simultaneously clarified and complicated her understanding of the current situation.
Just something to consider.
Zara finished for her, affectionate understanding evident in her expression.
Now we should review what you'll tell Alek when he inevitably comes seeking his intimate time this evening.
The practical redirect provided welcome focus, shifting conversation to strategic concerns rather than emotional complexities neither was fully prepared to address. They spent the next hour developing plausible excuses and contingency plans, utilizing Lyra's legitimate exhaustion from soul extraction as the foundation for postponing whatever expectations Alek had formed following their engagement ceremony. By mid-morning, messengers arrived with a formal summons, her father requesting her presence in his private study, where Cassius would deliver his official report on the ancestral warning investigation. The timing suggested Cassius had already met with High Councilor Embersong privately before this formal documentation of findings.
Remember,
Zara said as they prepared to answer the summons.
Maintain the agreed narrative. Ceremonial exhaustion, traditional rest period, nothing unusual beyond minor magical fluctuations during the ritual lighting.
Lyra nodded, touching the moon opal in her pocket once more for reassurance before they departed her tower. The stone's cool energy responded instantly, confirming ongoing connection despite increasing physical distance from Cassius's primary consciousness. They traversed Pyreholm's morning busy corridors with measured dignity, accepting congratulations from guild members they encountered along the way. Lyra maintained perfect public composure, the High Councilor's daughter appropriately reserved yet pleased following her successful engagement ceremony, her diplomatic poise revealing nothing of soul extraction, entity encounters, or spirit fragmentations that had actually occupied her night. Her father's private study occupied the eastern wing of the guild leadership complex, a circular chamber whose windows overlooked Pyreholm's central districts, while providing an unobstructed view of distant mountains beyond city boundaries. The space reflected its occupant's personality perfectly. meticulously organized without ostentation, powerful without needing to announce its significance through excessive decoration. High Councilor Lyra Embersong stood by the central window when they entered, his formal morning robes catching amber light in subtle patterns that emphasized his position without drawing undue attention to it. He turned at their arrival, his expression revealing nothing beyond appropriate ceremonial solemnity. Cassius already occupied the designated visitor's position before the High Councilor's desk, his Spirit Guild robes exchanged for more formal diplomatic attire that marked this meeting's official nature. He rose respectfully as Lyra and Zara entered, his violet eyes meeting hers briefly with carefully neutral acknowledgement, appropriate to their public roles.
Daughter,
Doran greeted with measured warmth.
I trust you've recovered from last night's ceremonial exertions?
Yes, Father.
Lyra replied, taking position opposite Cassius with formal grace that revealed nothing of their shared ordeal.
The traditional rest period proved quite restorative.
Excellent.
He gestured for them to be seated, returning to his own position behind the desk with practiced authority.
Magister Nightshade has completed his investigation of our ancestral manifestation. His findings warrant your attention before his departure.
The words landed with unexpected weight despite their anticipated content. Departure. Such a simple term for severing a connection that had developed with puzzling speed, yet undeniable significance over mere days of acquaintance. Lyra maintained her composed expression through practiced control, though her hand instinctively sought the moon opal in her pocket.
If I may proceed,
Cassius asked, his professional tone betraying nothing of their private connection as he addressed the High Councilor directly.
Please do.
Doran confirmed with a formal nod.
Present your complete assessment for official record.
Cassius organized several documents before him, the practiced movements of a scholar presenting research findings.
my investigation confirms your ancestors' manifestation was a genuine communication rather than a ceremonial anomaly.
He began, his voice carrying perfect balance between academic precision and diplomatic tact.
They appeared specifically to warn about a magical working involving a historical artifact known as the Crown of Cinders. A pre-separation device originally designed to harmonize elemental energies, but subsequently dismantled due to potentially dangerous applications when employed by a single practitioner.
Lyra watched her father's reaction carefully, noting subtle tension appearing around his eyes as Cassius continued his methodical explanation of the ancestral warning's significance. The presentation revealed enough to raise serious concerns without directly accusing Alek of forbidden practices. Exactly the measured approach they had agreed upon earlier.
Lord Brightforge's research into ancient fire techniques appears to involve attempting a reconstruction of partial crown components.
Cassius continued, careful qualifications suggesting possibility rather than certainty.
While such academic investigation isn't itself forbidden, certain applications could potentially disrupt established elemental balances in ways your ancestors clearly found concerning.
Her father's expression remained carefully neutral, though Lyra detected growing calculation beneath his disciplined exterior.
And your assessment of their specific warning regarding enslaved flames?
He asked, focused on the most alarming aspect of the ancestral message.
Spirit Guild archives contain historical references to magical workings that utilized ancestral connections without proper permissions.
Cassius explained, his scholarly precision masking deeper implications.
Such techniques were prohibited following elemental separation due to concerns about both ethical consent and magical stability.
The explanation presented facts without direct accusation, allowing the High Councilor to draw appropriate conclusions without forcing immediate political confrontation. Lyra recognized the skilled diplomatic navigation that honored their earlier agreement while providing her father necessary information to begin his own investigation.
I see.
Doran said after a measured silence, his gaze moving between Cassius and Lyra with careful assessment.
And the engagement ceremony itself. Did you observe anything during the ritual that would confirm or contradict these ancestral concerns?
Certain magical anomalies occurred during the ceremonial flame workings.
Cassius acknowledged carefully.
Pattern fluctuations, suggesting attempted channeling beyond traditional parameters. Without more extensive investigation, I cannot definitively connect these observations to the ancestral warnings, but the correlation warrants further consideration.
Perfect balance between revelation and restraint, providing necessary information while avoiding political recklessness that would force immediate action before proper preparation. Lyra felt unexpected admiration for Cassius's diplomatic skill, another dimension to abilities she had primarily experienced in more personal contexts. Her father's fingers tapped once against his desk. A subtle tell she recognized from childhood as indicating a significant decision formed, but not yet verbalized.
Your assessment has been most thorough, Magister Nightshade.
He said finally.
The Spirit Guild's assistance in this sensitive matter is appreciated.
He withdrew a small chest from his desk drawer, placing it precisely between them.
Your contracted payment, as agreed upon with Elder Thorn. The Fire Guild acknowledges completion of your diplomatic assignment with appropriate compensation.
The formal dismissal carried unmistakable finality, despite its polite phrasing. Assignment complete, payment rendered, services concluded with appropriate ceremonial courtesy. Exactly as they had anticipated, yet somehow more definitively terminal when executed with her father's characteristic precision.
It has been an honor to serve both our guild's interests through this investigation.
Cassius replied with a formal bow that revealed nothing of personal sentiments beneath a professional facade.
The Spirit Guild remains available should further consultation prove necessary.
A traditional closing that maintained the possibility of future communication while acknowledging current conclusion. Lyra watched this diplomatic exchange with external composure that masked an increasingly complicated internal response. Intellectual appreciation for skillful navigation alongside emotional resistance to imminent separation.
Daughter,
Her father said, turning his attention to her.
I would appreciate your insights regarding Lord Brightforge's research interests once Magister Nightshade has departed. Your academic understanding of historical artifacts might prove valuable in contextualizing these findings.
The request revealed more than its surface content suggested, an indication that her father took the warning seriously enough to seek additional information before determining a course of action. A small victory for their measured approach rather than direct confrontation strategy.
Of course, Father.
She replied with appropriate deference that concealed satisfaction at this development.
I've studied several historical references to pre-separation artifacts that might provide relevant context.
Cassius gathered his materials with scholarly precision, each movement deliberate yet efficient as he prepared for departure. No unnecessary prolonging of farewell, no dramatic gestures beyond formal protocol required by their respective positions. Just careful collection of documents, organized placement in a leather satchel, measured movements that revealed nothing of the significant personal sacrifice he had made on her behalf mere hours earlier.
High Councilor Embersong.
He said, rising with a final bow.
Magister Embersong, Magister Cinderkin. The Spirit Guild thanks you for your hospitality during this diplomatic exchange.
A perfect ceremonial closing, appropriate to a formal relationship rather than the intense connection they had actually developed. Lyra responded with equally precise etiquette, maintaining the dignified composure expected of a High Councilor's daughter, while carefully avoiding direct eye contact that might reveal unspoken complexities beneath public performance. Only as Cassius reached the doorway did a momentary break in protocol occur, a brief pause in his departure. Violet eyes meeting hers directly with an expression that transcended diplomatic formality. No words accompanied this final glance, yet it conveyed volumes without verbal articulation. Acknowledgement of connection beyond professional collaboration. Recognition of significance not captured by a ceremonial farewell. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with soft finality that somehow emphasized physical separation despite the moon opal's continued link between them. Something fundamental had shifted, not severed, but altered. Changed from an immediate presence to a distant connection maintained through a magical artifact and a fragmented soul rather than direct interaction.
Well,
Her father said after a brief silence, his assessing gaze resting on Lyra with unusually direct attention.
it seems your engagement has raised more questions than anticipated.
The conversation that followed proceeded exactly as they had planned. Lyra providing carefully selected historical information about the Crown of Cinders, while gauging her father's reactions to determine his likely course of action regarding Alek. Throughout their discussion, she maintained perfect balance between filial respect and scholarly insight, revealing appropriate concern without suggesting direct knowledge of forbidden practices. But beneath this outward performance, part of her attention remained fixed on the moon opal in her pocket, its cool energy providing a constant reminder of a connection maintained despite physical absence. Not the invasive heat of the necklace's enchantment, but a subtle resonance that respected boundaries while acknowledging a continued link between separated individuals. When eventually dismissed from her father's study, Lyra maintained ceremonial composure until reaching a private alcove far from curious eyes or listening ears. Only then did her carefully maintained facade crack, revealing emotional complexity beneath diplomatic performance.
He's really gone.
She whispered, the reality of Cassius's departure finally penetrating intellectual understanding that had acknowledged necessity without fully processing emotional impact. Zara's arm slipped around her shoulders, providing silent support that required no explicit explanation.
Only temporarily,
She reminded gently.
and not completely. His fragment remains with you through the necklace.
Logical reassurance that somehow intensified rather than diminished an unexpected hollow sensation beneath Lyra's ribs.
I know.
She acknowledged, fingers clutching the moon opal with perhaps more force than strictly necessary.
It just feels...
Words failed as unexpected tears welled in her eyes, emotion breaking through disciplined control with startling intensity. Not just a response to Cassius's departure, but a culmination of everything she had experienced since Alek first placed the necklace around her throat. Fear, violation, resistance, connection, sacrifice, possibility, all cascading beyond carefully maintained barriers now that the immediate crisis had temporarily subsided.
Come.
Zara said simply, guiding her toward a more private location where a momentary vulnerability wouldn't become a public spectacle.
You need a moment to actually process everything that's happened.
Sanctuary came in the form of a small meditation garden rarely used during daytime hours. A quiet space with flame-resistant foliage providing natural privacy screens around a central seating area. Here, sheltered from casual observation, Lyra finally surrendered to emotional release, long forestalled by necessary action and political navigation.
I don't understand why this affects me so strongly,
She admitted between controlled breaths, fighting to maintain some dignity even in breakdown.
We've known each other mere days. Professional collaboration during a crisis shouldn't create such attachment.
Zara's expression held no judgment, only compassionate understanding as she offered a handkerchief for tears Lyra hadn't realized were falling.
Some connections don't follow expected timelines,
She said simply.
particularly when formed through shared danger and genuine sacrifice rather than political calculation.
The observation carried wisdom beyond Zara's years. Insight that penetrated intellectual defenses Lyra had constructed around emotional vulnerabilities. A different kind of connection indeed, one based on mutual recognition rather than strategic advantage, respect rather than utility, willing sacrifice rather than calculated exchange.
And there's something else.
Lyra realized, touching the necklace with sudden awareness.
Since his fragment entered the fire opal, I haven't experienced any of the physical effects from the enchantment. No inappropriate heat, no artificial responses, no attempted emotional manipulation.
This revelation carried significant practical implications beyond personal comfort, suggesting Cassius's sacrifice had not merely created a temporary stalemate with the entity, but actually neutralized its immediate influence. Protection that transcended a simple barrier to establish a genuine countermeasure against the Ifrit fragment's manipulations.
His fragment must be fully occupying the entity's attention.
Zara theorized, her analytical mind engaging with this new information,
preventing it from directing energy outward while they battle within the necklace's realm.
The imagery carried both reassurance and concern, protection purchased through continuous spiritual confrontation. Cassius's fragmented consciousness engaged in ongoing battle that wouldn't end until a more permanent solution could be found. A sacrifice that extended beyond momentary intervention into sustained commitment, without a clear resolution timeline.
He didn't hesitate.
Lyra said softly, remembering the matter-of-fact way he had explained soul fragmentation, as though such an extreme measure represented a reasonable response rather than extraordinary sacrifice.
No calculation of personal cost against potential benefit. Just immediate action to protect someone he barely knows.
I think he knows you better than that statement suggests,
Zara replied with gentle honesty.
Some connections form more deeply in days than others manage in years, particularly when built on authentic recognition rather than political convenience.
The observation aligned uncomfortably well with Lyra's own unacknowledged awareness. Her connection with Cassius had developed with startling rapidity, yet undeniable authenticity. a resonance that transcended rational explanation or a convenient political narrative. Something recognized rather than constructed, discovered rather than arranged.
It doesn't matter,
She said finally, practical reality reasserting itself through emotional complexity.
Even with this connection, we exist in different guilds with fundamentally separated magical traditions. Whatever personal considerations might exist, practical constraints remain unchanged.
Zara's expression suggested disagreement with this assessment, though she refrained from a direct challenge to Lyra's conclusion.
For now,
She acknowledged instead,
we focus on immediate concerns. Managing Alek's expectations tonight, monitoring the necklace's condition, maintaining the Moon Opal's connection until Cassius returns from the Spirit Guild.
the practical approach provided a welcome anchor among emotional turbulence. Clear objectives requiring immediate attention rather than complicated feelings defying simple resolution. Lyra straightened, wiping away final traces of unexpected tears with deliberate composure that reclaimed the disciplined exterior expected of the High Councilor's daughter.
You're right.
She agreed, rising from the garden bench with renewed determination.
One challenge at a time. Beginning with convincing Alek that tonight's intimate encounter requires postponement, without raising suspicion about the necklace's neutralized condition.
As they departed the meditation garden to prepare for the evening's inevitable confrontation with her fiancé, Lyra touched the moon opal once more, drawing subtle reassurance from its continued connection to a certain distant consciousness. Whatever complex emotions Cassius's departure had triggered remained unresolved. Questions without clear answers suspended between them, despite physical separation. For now, practical necessities would occupy her attention. Strategic planning, political navigation, immediate threats requiring immediate responses. But beneath these external concerns, unacknowledged awareness persisted. A connection formed beyond rational explanation or a convenient political narrative. A possibility glimpsed between established constraints, an alternative pathway not yet fully recognized, but increasingly difficult to deny. The moon opal pulsed once in response to her touch. Cool energy so different from the necklace's invasive heat. Not commanding, but inviting. Not imposing, but offering. Not controlling, but connecting. A different model entirely from what guild politics had taught her to expect from magical relationships. A possibility she wasn't yet prepared to fully examine, but could no longer entirely ignore. The afternoon stretched before Lyra like a battlefield awaiting its combatants. She stood at her tower window, watching shadows lengthen across Pyreholm's volcanic stone streets as sunset approached. In her palm, the moon opal pulsed with a gentle rhythm, a quiet reminder of the connection maintained across distance.
You've been staring at nothing for nearly 10 minutes.
Zara observed from her position by the door.
Not that I mind the break from strategizing, but it's unlike you to drift.
Lyra turned from the window, tucking the moon opal back into her pocket.
Just considering all possible approaches for tonight.
Zara's knowing expression suggested she recognized the deflection, but chose not to challenge it.
And which approach seems most promising? We've discussed several.
They had indeed spent hours developing potential strategies for managing Alek's expectations. The most direct option, simply refusing his advances, carried too much risk of arousing suspicion, particularly given how the necklace's influence had been neutralized without his knowledge. Any sudden change in Lyra's receptiveness would alert him to potential interference.
Misdirection rather than rejection.
Lyra decided, moving to her dressing table where several vials of ceremonial oils stood in neat arrangement.
We maintain the appearance of eager anticipation while creating circumstances that necessitate postponement.
Ceremonial preparation extensions?
Zara suggested, joining her at the table.
Traditional purification rituals often stretch several days following formal engagement.
Lyra shook her head, her fingers tracing the stopper of a crimson vial.
Alek studied guild traditions extensively before proposing our union. He'd know those rituals are optional for modern marriages and only strictly observed by traditionalist families.
Which the Embersongs definitely are not.
Zara acknowledged with a grimace.
Not since my mother's generation, at least.
Lyra selected a different vial. Amber glass containing golden liquid that caught the fading sunlight.
But there are other traditions he might find more compelling.
She uncapped the vial, allowing a subtle fragrance to escape. Spiced honey with undertones of volcanic ash and night-blooming fire lilies. The scent filled the air between them, rich and evocative of ancient Fire Guild courtship rituals. Zara's eyes widened with sudden understanding.
Flame blessing oil? Lyra, that's brilliant.
And historically accurate.
Lyra confirmed, recapping the vial carefully.
Pre-consummation anointment with ancestral oils remains one tradition even progressive families maintain, particularly for politically significant unions.
Because it symbolizes the literal joining of family flame signatures.
Zara continued, her tactical mind engaging with the strategy.
And requires at least 72 hours of absorption before intimate contact to avoid burning both participants.
Lyra allowed herself a small smile, the first genuine one since Cassius's departure.
Precisely. A perfect excuse that suggests eager anticipation rather than reluctance. I'm simply ensuring our first encounter will be optimally harmonious.
And gives us another full day to develop more permanent solutions.
Zara added, looking impressed.
Alek can hardly object to a tradition that supposedly enhances magical resonance during intimacy.
Especially when presented as a gift from an enthusiastic bride.
Lyra agreed, setting the vial in a ceremonial holder.
His own research into guild traditions will confirm both the practice and its required waiting period.
As they continued refining details of this approach, Lyra found her thoughts straying repeatedly to the chamber's absent third presence. What would Cassius think of their strategy? Would he recognize the elegant simplicity of using tradition as a shield rather than a constraint? Would those violet eyes cloud with approval as they had during their work in the Ember Sanctuary? The moon opal pulsed in her pocket, as if responding to these thoughts with gentle awareness. Not communication exactly, but acknowledgement of a connection maintained despite separation.
You're doing it again,
Zara observed with gentle precision.
Doing what?
Lyra asked, her attention returning reluctantly to present circumstances.
Disappearing into thoughts I suspect involve a certain spirit seer.
Her friend's tone held no judgment, merely observation.
Your hand keeps finding that pocket where you've stored his stone.
Lyra withdrew her fingers quickly, unsettled by this unconscious revelation of inner preoccupation.
Monitoring the connection is simply practical caution,
she replied, the explanation sounding hollow even to her own ears.
Of course.
Zara agreed with diplomatic grace that somehow managed to convey complete disbelief without direct contradiction.
Now how exactly shall we stage this presentation of ceremonial oils to your eager fiancé?
The redirect succeeded in focusing Lyra's attention on immediate concerns rather than distant connections. They spent the remaining daylight hours preparing both their tactical approach and the physical setting for Alek's anticipated visit. The oil required proper ceremonial display, arranged within an ancestral Embersong holder, surrounded by traditional flame configurations that would validate its authenticity while emphasizing its connection to her family lineage.
Subtle yet unmistakable.
Zara commented as they completed the arrangement.
If he rejects this tradition, he implicitly rejects your family heritage.
A political misstep he won't risk, regardless of personal impatience.
Lyra agreed, making final adjustments to the display's positioning.
His research into ancient fire magic makes him particularly susceptible to arguments about traditional methods enhancing magical resonance.
As twilight deepened toward evening proper, a messenger arrived bearing formal notification of Lord Brightforge's intention to call upon his betrothed following the evening meal. Phrasing both proper and suggestive, maintaining ceremonial courtesy while clearly indicating expectation of private intimacy.
Right on schedule.
Zara noted, reading the message over Lyra's shoulder.
Shall I remain during this encounter or withdraw to maintain appearance of anticipated privacy?
Lyra considered briefly before responding.
Remain initially, as is appropriate for a friend assisting post-engagement preparations. Then withdraw naturally when the ceremonial oils are presented, suggesting tactful recognition of impending intimacy while actually maintaining proximity should circumstances require intervention.
Elegant.
Zara approved.
I'll position myself in the antechamber, close enough for emergency assistance but respecting apparent privacy.
They completed remaining preparations with practiced efficiency. Years of navigating guild politics together, having created operational harmony that required minimal explicit coordination. Lyra changed into appropriate evening attire, a gown of deep burgundy that suggested passionate anticipation, while maintaining the dignified elegance expected of her position. Throughout these practical activities, the moon opal remained a cool presence in her pocket. Occasional pulses confirming maintained connection with distant consciousness, while providing subtle reassurance against the necklace's neutralized but still present threat. Though the entity remained contained by Cassius's fragment, its potential revival should that protection falter remained a concerning reality, requiring constant awareness.
He approaches.
Zara announced from her position by the window, where she had a perfect view of the main path leading to Lyra's tower.
Accompanied by 2 attendants bearing gift boxes and what appears to be ceremonial wine.
Traditional courtship gifts.
Lyra noted, making final adjustments to her appearance before the mirror.
Suggesting both generosity and expectation of reciprocity.
She touched the fire opals at her throat. Silent now, their earlier aggressive heat completely absent since Cassius's fragment had established containment of the entity within. The jewelry remained physically present, its magical binding preventing removal, but its influence had been neutralized through a sacrifice she still struggled to fully comprehend. Zara moved to take position by the sitting area, arranging herself to appear as a supporting friend rather than a protective guardian, a subtle distinction crucial to maintaining their strategic deception.
Remember,
She said quietly,
appear eager but traditionally mindful. Anticipation rather than reluctance.
I'm familiar with performance requirements.
Lyra replied. perhaps more sharply than intended. Then softer.
Sorry. This situation requires more complex emotional navigation than I anticipated.
Zara's expression softened with understanding.
Navigating feelings for one man while pretending attraction to another would challenge anyone, Lyra. Even without magical complications.
Before she could formulate a response to this uncomfortable accuracy, a formal knock announced Alek's arrival. Perfect timing, neither rushed nor delayed. Exactly the interval appropriate for dignified eagerness rather than undisciplined haste. His calculated precision in maintaining proper appearance never faltered, regardless of circumstance.
Enter?
Lyra called, assuming position by the ceremonial display that simultaneously highlighted both the flame blessing oil and her own carefully composed figure. The door opened to reveal Alek Brightforge in his full magnificent presence. Copper gold hair perfectly arranged. Formal evening attire accentuating his impressive physique without appearing ostentatious. His golden eyes immediately finding her with apparent pleasure that might have seemed genuine had she not witnessed his true nature within the necklace's realm.
My dear Lyra,
He greeted, stepping into the chamber with confidence that somehow managed to suggest both propriety and possession simultaneously. 2 attendants followed, bearing packages as Zara had observed.
you look absolutely radiant this evening.
Lord Brightforge.
She responded with precisely calibrated warmth, lowering her gaze briefly in traditional acknowledgement before meeting his eyes with a carefully constructed expression of pleased anticipation.
Your presence honors my chamber.
His smile deepened at this formal yet suggestive phrasing. Exactly the response expected of a properly raised Fire Guild daughter preparing for traditional courtship progression. The attendants placed their burdens on an appropriate side table before withdrawing with silent efficiency, closing the door behind them to provide expected privacy.
Magister Cinderkin,
Alek acknowledged Zara's presence with a polite nod that somehow managed to convey both acceptance of her presence and expectation of her imminent departure.
I trust the engagement celebrations didn't exhaust you as thoroughly as they appeared to affect my bride.
Not at all, Lord Brightforge.
Zara replied with perfect social grace.
Some of us didn't have the responsibility of maintaining such complex flame constructs throughout an entire ceremony.
The subtle compliment, acknowledging both Lyra's magical exertion and his own impressive performance, struck exactly the right diplomatic note. Alek's expression warmed further, his golden eyes returning to Lyra with increased intensity.
Indeed,
He agreed.
your phoenix manifestation was particularly magnificent, my dear. Such control over flame detail, while maintaining animation throughout the entire ritual. Few mages could achieve such a feat without significant exhaustion afterward.
His apparent understanding of her exhaustion provided the perfect opening for their prepared strategy. Lyra moved toward the ceremonial display with measured grace, gesturing toward the flame-blessing oil with deliberate emphasis.
Your appreciation of magical precision has always been one of your most attractive qualities, Alek.
She said, using his first name without title for the first time. Calculated intimacy that immediately captured his full attention.
It inspired me to prepare something special for this evening.
His golden eyes shifted to the display, recognition dawning immediately as he identified the traditional arrangement.
Flame blessing oil.
He observed, genuine interest evident in his voice.
From the Embersong ancestral reserves, I presume?
The very same that has blessed unions in my family for 17 generations.
Lyra confirmed, allowing pride in her lineage to color her tone appropriately.
Specifically formulated to enhance magical resonance between joined flames.
Alek approached the display with scholarly reverence that reflected his genuine interest in ancient fire techniques. Perhaps the only authentic passion he possessed beyond ambition itself.
The traditional pre-consummation anointment,
He said, admiration evident as he studied the amber liquid.
I confess I hadn't expected such adherence to historical practices from your family.
Some traditions persist because they genuinely enhance magical effectiveness.
Lyra replied, her voice softening to suggest shared academic appreciation, transitioning toward more personal application.
And I find myself impatient to experience all aspects of our union's potential.
The implication landed perfectly, suggesting eager anticipation temporarily constrained by traditional method, rather than reluctance seeking postponement. Alek's expression shifted subtly, calculation briefly visible beneath desire as he processed this development against his larger plans.
The anointment requires 72 hours of absorption before contact.
He noted, his tone carefully balanced between academic observation and personal disappointment.
For maximum efficacy, yes.
Lyra agreed, stepping closer to touch the ceremonial vial with meaningful deliberation.
My ancestors documented quite vividly the enhanced resonance experienced when the proper absorption period is observed.
She allowed her fingers to trail from the vial to his arm in a suggestive gesture that implied clear anticipation of future intimacy.
I would not have our first joining be anything less than transcendent, Alek. Not when a single day's patience promises such magnified pleasure.
Zara chose this perfect moment to rise gracefully from her position, the movement drawing attention without interrupting the established atmosphere.
I should withdraw,
She said with exemplary tact.
The anointment ritual is traditionally performed in privacy.
Of course.
Alek agreed, his golden eyes never leaving Lyra's face as he processed the implications of this development.
Traditional practices deserve proper observation.
As Zara departed with perfectly calibrated expressions of respectful withdrawal, Lyra allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction at their strategy's apparent success. Alek's academic fascination with ancient fire magic had provided exactly the leverage they had anticipated. His desire for enhanced magical resonance temporarily overcoming more immediate physical impulses.
Shall we proceed with the anointment?
Lyra suggested, her voice pitched to imply intimate anticipation rather than strategic relief.
The traditional application focuses on 7 sacred points to maximize flame harmony during consummation.
His golden eyes darkened with genuine interest, both scholarly and personal, as she removed the vial from its holder with ceremonial precision.
I would be honored to participate in your family's traditional preparation.
He replied, his voice deepening appropriately. What followed was a masterful performance of traditional ritual that simultaneously maintained complete propriety while suggesting imminent passion merely postponed for enhancement rather than avoided through reluctance. Lyra applied small amounts of flame blessing oil to designated points on both Alek's body and her own. Forehead, throat, heart, each wrist, and finally palms pressed together in symbolic joining. Throughout this ceremonial application, she maintained a narrative of anticipated union, enhanced through traditional methods. Words carefully chosen to imply eager participation in intimacy, merely delayed for maximum effectiveness rather than permanently avoided. Alek responded with appropriate scholarly appreciation, mixed with personal restraint, his golden eyes watching her movements with an intensity that might have been unsettling had she not been prepared for such scrutiny.
Tomorrow evening, then?
He said as the ritual concluded, his voice carrying equal measures of anticipation and calculated acceptance.
When the blessing has properly integrated with our magical signatures.
I shall count each hour,
Lyra replied, the formal phrasing delivering perfect balance between propriety and passion.
and dream of what awaits when traditional observation has been fulfilled.
His departure carried ceremonial dignity appropriate to the occasion. Formal, yet intimate. Restrained, yet promising. Completely aligned with guild expectations for properly conducted courtship progression. Only when the door closed behind him did Lyra allow tension to leave her shoulders. A controlled exhale releasing pressure maintained throughout the performance. Zara returned immediately from the antechamber, her expression shifting from diplomatic neutrality to genuine admiration.
That,
She declared,
was masterfully executed. He accepted the delay without suspicion, while believing himself honored through traditional inclusion.
Another 72 hours.
Lyra confirmed, carefully returning the flame blessing oil to its ceremonial holder.
Time to develop a more permanent solution before a similar performance becomes necessary.
And you played the eager bride-to-be so convincingly I almost believed it myself.
Zara added, helping reset the chamber to its normal arrangement.
Though I noticed you never actually promised consummation, just implied its inevitability.
Lyra allowed herself a small smile at this observation of technical precision.
Careful word choice remains essential when navigating political complexities.
She agreed.
Direct falsehood creates vulnerability, but strategic ambiguity maintains necessary flexibility.
As evening transitioned to night proper, they completed remaining preparations for sleep. Zara eventually departing for her own residence after establishing communication protocols should emergency arise. Lyra securing her chamber with both standard and additional protective wards designed to alert her to any attempted intrusion. Alone finally, Lyra withdrew the moon opal from her pocket, holding it between her palms as she sat on the edge of her bed. The stone's cool energy responded immediately to direct contact. Its gentle pulses somehow conveying connection maintained across whatever distance now separated her from Cassius's primary consciousness.
I don't know if you can actually perceive my thoughts through this connection,
She said softly to the empty room, words meant for distant awareness rather than immediate audience.
but your sacrifice continues protecting me while his plans advance. Another few days gained through strategic delay, but permanent solution remains elusive.
The moon opal pulsed once in what almost seemed like response. Not communication exactly, but acknowledgement of connection honored through direct address. Lyra found unexpected comfort in this simple interaction. Momentary relief from calculated performances and strategic deceptions that had occupied her day. As she prepared for sleep, practical considerations gradually gave way to less disciplined thoughts. Memory returning to that moment in the garden shed when Cassius had stood close enough for her to see individual flecks of darker purple within his extraordinary violet eyes. The near touch that had never quite manifested as Instructor Peller's interruption had created both frustration and relief in equal measure. What might have happened without that interruption? The question surfaced unbidden as Lyra settled beneath silk covers. the moon opal placed carefully on her bedside table, where its gentle glow provided comforting presence in the darkened chamber. Would diplomatic necessity have evolved into genuine connection? Would professional collaboration have transformed into something neither had anticipated when first introduced? The necklace remained silent against her throat, its usual invasive heat entirely absent since Cassius's fragment had established containment of the entity within. Yet as sleep approached, Lyra found herself unexpectedly concerned about what might await in dreams, the realm where consciousness relaxed its careful control, where barriers established during waking hours might waver in sleeping vulnerability.
Be vigilant.
She whispered to the fragment she imagined existing somewhere within the necklace's dimensional pocket.
Dreams have always been doorways between worlds.
The moon opal pulsed once more as her eyes closed, sleep claiming consciousness despite lingering concerns about what might follow. For several hours, darkness prevailed. Dreamless rest that suggested successful protection against whatever influence the entity might have attempted to exert during unconscious vulnerability. Then, gradually, awareness returned, not to morning reality, but to a dream landscape unlike any Lyra had previously experienced. She stood in a garden reminiscent of the Ember Sanctuary, yet somehow different, more vibrant, more alive with possibilities than physical reality could contain. The central fire basin burned with flames that shifted between crimson and violet, colors combining without consuming each other despite traditional elemental opposition.
Lyra.
The voice emerged from behind her, familiar yet somehow transformed within this dream space, deeper, more resonant, carrying emotional depth typically concealed beneath scholarly precision. She turned to find Cassius standing several paces away, his form simultaneously substantial and ephemeral, in the way only dreams could manifest.
Is this really you?
She asked, the question reflecting uncertainty about whether this represented genuine connection or merely her own consciousness constructing fantasy from memory and desire.
Or just a dream creation my mind has manifested?
He smiled, that rare expression that transformed his serious features into something unexpectedly warm.
Both, perhaps.
He answered, the scholarly qualifications somehow endearing rather than evasive.
My fragment within the necklace maintains connection with my primary consciousness. Dreams provide a natural pathway between separated awareness.
The entity?
She asked immediately, practical concerns emerging even in this dreamscape.
Contained,
He assured her, moving closer with that fluid grace she remembered from their sanctuary working.
my fragment occupies its attention completely, allowing this moment of connection without interference.
Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by awareness of his proximity, her dream self responding to his presence with an intensity that waking control might have constrained. Here, in this space between conscious thought and unconscious desire, carefully maintained barriers seemed less necessary, less relevant to authentic experience.
I wasn't certain the moon opal would maintain connection across such distance,
She admitted, finding directness easier within the dream's freedom than waking calculation allowed.
especially with your fragment already dividing your consciousness.
Some connections transcend physical limitations.
He replied, now standing close enough that she could see those violet eyes in perfect detail. The darker flecks she had noticed in the garden shed, now even more pronounced in this dream-enhanced perception.
Particularly when established through genuine resonance rather than forced channeling.
The contrast with the necklace's invasive influence couldn't have been clearer. Connection based on harmonious alignment rather than imposed control. Invitation rather than compulsion. Mutual recognition rather than unilateral domination. Everything Alek's approach fundamentally lacked. Exemplified in Cassius's opposite orientation to relationship.
I've been thinking about our encounter in the garden shed,
Lyra admitted, dream courage allowing articulation of thoughts she might have restrained in waking interaction.
before Instructor Peller's interruption.
As have I.
Cassius acknowledged, his dream voice carrying emotional resonance typically constrained beneath scholarly precision.
More frequently than professional priorities would suggest appropriate.
The admission created unexpected warmth that surged through her dream form like fire current finding an unimpeded path. Not the necklace's artificial heat, but authentic response to genuine connection acknowledged without calculation or constraint.
We were interrupted at a rather significant moment.
She observed, finding herself moving closer without conscious decision to do so.
A diplomatic incident prevented before its potential manifestation.
His smile deepened at this formal phrasing of a decidedly informal situation.
Perhaps this dream provides opportunity to explore what might have occurred without such interruption.
He suggested, his voice dropping to an intimate register that sent a pleasant shiver through her dream awareness.
For academic understanding naturally,
Lyra replied, surprising herself with playfulness not typically expressed in waking interaction.
purely investigative purposes.
Scholarly thoroughness demands comprehensive examination.
Cassius agreed, matching her tone perfectly as his hands rose to frame her face with extraordinary gentleness.
Though I find my academic objectivity increasingly compromised in your presence.
The confession, a simple yet profound acknowledgement of the effect she had on his carefully maintained composure, affected Lyra more deeply than elaborate declarations might have achieved. Truth offered without expectation or manipulation, vulnerability expressed without demand for reciprocation. When his lips finally met hers, the contact created a sensation unlike anything physical reality had previously provided. Connection that existed simultaneously as emotional recognition and magical resonance, personal desire, and elemental harmony. Fire and spirit, traditionally opposed yet finding unexpected complementarity through authentic alignment, rather than forced submission. The garden dreamscape responded to their connection, flames in the central basin rising higher, with colors shifting more rapidly between crimson and violet, as their kiss deepened from tentative exploration to mutual certainty. Lyra's hands found their way to his shoulders, dream touch both substantial and ethereal as his arms encircled her waist with equal parts desire and reverence.
This exceeds academic parameters.
She murmured against his lips, dream humor emerging from a place typically concealed beneath political calculation and strategic restraint.
Shall we establish new investigative boundaries?
He asked, violet eyes conveying both genuine consideration of her comfort and unmistakable desire for continued exploration.
I believe comprehensive understanding requires thorough examination.
Lyra replied, finding unexpected freedom in the dream's release from waking constraints.
For proper scholarly documentation.
What followed transcended simple physical interaction. Dream reality allowing connection that combined emotional recognition, magical resonance, and physical desire into an experience that defied conventional categorization. Where the necklace had attempted to create artificial responses through invasive manipulation, this dream encounter manifested authentic connection through mutual participation. Their hands explored with equal parts reverence and desire, discovering responses unique to each other's touch rather than conforming to predetermined expectations. Where Alek's influence had sought to control and direct, Cassius's approach invited and received a fundamentally different orientation to a relationship that manifested through every caress and response.
The ancients described elemental harmony as transcendent recognition rather than engineered compliance.
Cassius murmured against her neck, his voice carrying scholarly knowledge transformed through intimate application.
Fire and spirit finding completion through authentic alignment.
Show me.
Lyra whispered, dream courage allowing direct expression of desire typically contained beneath layers of political calculation and strategic restraint. The dream unfolded around them. An ethereal canvas where imagination held sway over reality in an intricate balance. Lyra found herself enveloped in a space that defied conventional description, a realm where her form morphed and shifted with each passing moment, guided by the whims of her deepest desires. Cassius appeared to her within this dreamscape, his presence both familiar and enigmatic. He was a figure fashioned from her own subconscious musings, an embodiment of every thought, every fleeting fantasy that had danced through her mind over countless waking hours. As they approached each other, an inexplicable magnetic force pulled them inexorably together. Their lips met in a kiss that transcended mere physicality, becoming a fusion of souls rather than just bodies, a melding of energies that resonated with profound intensity across the entirety of their being. Their hands roamed freely over one another's forms, not confined by the constraints of flesh and bone. Instead, they seemed to flow like liquid moonlight, tracing contours of unseen landscapes shaped by deepest passions and secret dreams. Each touch sent a ripple through both of them, a sensation that spoke of connection far beyond the mere physical. Lyra felt herself being drawn deeper into this dream, her essence merging with Cassius's in ways she had never imagined possible. Their bodies seemed to dissolve into one another, a blending so complete it transcended anything she could have previously conceived or experienced. In this formless expanse, they explored each other with a hunger fueled by the magic of their shared dreamscape. A realm where every touch ignited an explosion of sensation, where every movement traced paths across new territories of pleasure and discovery. Their union became a dance that defied description, a fluid interweaving of energy and emotion rather than strictly physical forms. The sensations were at once familiar, yet novel. Familiar in their intensity, novel in their manifestation within this unique dream reality. As they moved together, the dreamscape itself responded, a kaleidoscope of shifting colors and patterns that mirrored the crescendo of their passion. Each wave of pleasure they generated rippled through the dream world around them, manifesting as swirling clouds of stardust that burst forth in brilliant displays of light and color whenever their union reached a peak. Their breaths intermingled in this dreamscape, creating harmonies that resonated deep within both souls, a symphony of shared ecstasy that spoke to a connection far deeper than the physical. It was as if they had discovered an entirely new dimension of intimacy, one where boundaries between self dissolved into unity, allowing for an exploration previously unattainable by mere flesh. The dreamscape itself appeared to celebrate their union in its own unique way. Flashes of pure light bursting forth like stars born from cosmic collisions, painting the dream reality around them with vibrant, living colors that pulsed rhythmically to the beat of their joined hearts. And yet, as intense and profound as this experience was, there remained an undercurrent of something deeper, an unspoken acknowledgement that beneath all the layers of magic and wonder, they still held a fundamental connection that transcended even these dream realm boundaries. In the aftermath of their shared ecstasy, they lingered within the embrace of this dream connection. Two souls intertwined in a way that defied the constraints of any single form or reality. As slowly, reluctantly, they began to disentangle themselves from this deepest level of union, Lyra realized she had found something profoundly significant within this dreamscape. Their shared experience had not been merely an indulgence of forbidden desires. It was a testament to the power of mutual respect and understanding. A proof that connection on such a deep level was possible when trust was present. A lesson learned in the sanctuary of their deepest imaginations, carried with her into the waking world as a beacon of potential for future connections. For within this dream, Lyra had discovered not only an unyielding passion, but also a profound realization that true elemental harmony could be found in unity, forged from mutual respect and understanding, something far more precious and resilient than any forced compliance. A lesson etched into the very core of her being, awaiting future discovery and application in the complex tapestry of life beyond dreams. When dawn eventually pulled Lyra from this dream encounter back to physical reality, she woke with a clarity previously absent from her understanding of current circumstances. Not merely a strategic problem requiring a tactical solution, but a fundamental choice between relationship models representing entirely different approaches to power and connection. The moon opal glowed softly on her bedside table, its gentle light somehow both validation of the dream's authenticity and a promise of continued connection despite physical separation. The necklace remained silent against her throat. The entity contained through sacrifice she understood more comprehensively following the dream's insights into Cassius's true nature.
We will find another way,
She whispered, certainty replacing previous uncertainty as she rose to meet the day's challenges with renewed determination. Not just escape from unwanted obligation, but movement toward a possibility previously unimagined within guild constraints. The path forward remained complicated. Political obstacles still significant. Practical solutions not immediately apparent. Yet something fundamental had shifted within Lyra's understanding of available options. A recognition that alternatives existed beyond compliance or futile resistance, beyond acceptance or rejection of predetermined choices. The model Cassius had offered, connection based on recognition rather than control, resonance rather than domination, represented more than personal preference. It suggested an entirely different approach to elemental magic itself. A possibility that the guild separation had been constructed to maintain political power rather than address genuine magical necessity. With this perspective illuminating previous shadows, Lyra began preparing for the day ahead, her strategic mind already calculating pathways toward both immediate freedom from Alek's scheme and longer-term transformation of understanding regarding elemental compatibility. Not merely personal liberation, but potential revolution in magical theory that could fundamentally alter Eldervale's rigid separation of guilds. The moon opal pulsed encouragingly as she placed it carefully in her pocket. Its cool energy so different from the necklace's invasive heat. Whatever challenges awaited, whatever obstacles remained between current constraints and future possibilities, she faced them with a certainty previously absent from her calculations. Fire and spirit had found unexpected harmony. Perhaps other elemental combinations might discover similar resonance if approached through recognition rather than control, invitation rather than compulsion, mutual enhancement rather than hierarchical organization.
One day at a time,
She reminded herself, practical strategy tempering revolutionary vision with necessary patience.
First, freedom from the necklace. Then, exploration of alternatives beyond guild limitations.
The sun rose fully over Pyreholm, a new day bringing both immediate challenges and longer-term possibilities into sharper focus. Whatever came next, Lyra faced it with conviction. The path forward illuminated by a connection discovered beyond waking constraints and political expectations. Morning light filtered through the tower windows, painting Lyra's chamber in hues of amber and gold. She stood before her research table, fingers tracing ancient symbols in a text few outside the Fire Guild archives had ever seen. The moon opal lay beside the open book, its gentle pulse a counterpoint to her racing thoughts.
There must be a solution,
She murmured, turning another brittle page with careful precision.
Some precedent for removing a soul-binding artifact without the creator's participation.
A day had passed since her dream encounter with Cassius. One day of maintaining an elaborate deception with Alek, extending the flame-blessing oil ritual with increasingly creative excuses, while her mind worked furiously toward escape. The precarious balance couldn't hold much longer. Tonight, Alek expected consummation with no further delay, his patience worn dangerously thin by her tactical postponements. A soft knock preceded Zara's entrance, her expression tight with controlled urgency.
Any progress?
She asked, securing the door behind her with additional wards of her own design.
Nothing promising?
Lyra admitted, frustration evident as she gestured toward the scattered texts.
Every historical reference confirms what Cassius told us. A binding artifact of this nature requires either the creator's willing removal or the wearer's death.
Zara moved to stand beside her, eyes scanning the ancient texts with practiced efficiency.
Could his fragment within the necklace weaken the binding enough for physical removal?
I've considered that,
Lyra replied, touching the fire opals at her throat.
but the binding exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The physical clasp disappeared because it transformed into a metaphysical anchor between realms. Breaking it physically without addressing its spectral component would likely cause catastrophic backlash.
Affecting both you and Cassius's fragment.
Zara concluded grimly.
Precisely.
Silence settled between them, heavy with implications neither wished to voice aloud. Lyra turned another page, though her attention had shifted inward, examining possibilities from angles she had previously considered too desperate for serious consideration.
There is one approach we haven't properly explored,
she said finally, her voice carefully neutral despite the radical nature of what she was about to suggest.
The texts unanimously agree that death releases the binding.
Zara's head snapped up, alarm evident in her expression.
Lyra, no, that's not...
Temporary death,
Lyra clarified, turning to a specific passage she had marked earlier.
Fire Guild medical archives document cases of suspended animation that register as death to magical bindings, while allowing subsequent revival under proper conditions.
That's insanely dangerous.
Zara protested, though Lyra noted her friend didn't dismiss the idea outright.
The margin for error
Is admittedly narrow,
Lyra acknowledged.
but not non-existent.
She selected another text, opening to a marked section with deliberate care.
This treatise on soul tethering describes the precise moment when life force diminishes enough to release magical bindings, but hasn't yet crossed the threshold beyond which revival becomes impossible.
Zara leaned closer, scholarly interest temporarily overriding practical objections as she examined the diagrams detailing the narrow boundary between reversible and permanent death.
These calculations are remarkably precise for such an imprecise threshold.
The Cindersage who wrote this spent 40 years studying nothing else.
Lyra explained.
Morella Ashbrand's work on death thresholds remains the definitive reference, despite the Guild's discomfort with her research methods.
As Zara studied the text more carefully, her expression shifted from outright rejection to reluctant consideration.
Even if, and I emphasize if, such a procedure could work in theory, the practical application presents enormous risk. What you're suggesting is essentially controlled death with planned resurrection.
Yes,
The simplicity of Lyra's response hung between them, its implications rippling outward like a stone dropped in still water. Not merely theoretical consideration, but genuine intent. A measure of her desperation that even this extreme solution had moved from abstract possibility to concrete plan. Zara straightened, meeting her friend's gaze directly.
You're serious about this?
I see no viable alternative.
Lyra replied, her voice steady despite the enormity of what she proposed.
The entity remains contained for now through Cassius's sacrifice, but that balance grows increasingly precarious. My father's investigation proceeds too slowly to prevent the marriage. And tonight, Alek expects consummation that would deepen the binding beyond any hope of extraction.
She closed the ancient tome with careful precision that belied the turmoil beneath her composed exterior.
Temporary death offers the only certain path to removing the necklace without Alek's participation. Once freed from his direct influence, we can address the larger threat he poses to the Guild.
Zara's silence spoke volumes. Not outright rejection, but careful calculation of a plan with potentially fatal consequences. Her analytical mind would be assessing probabilities, weighing risks against increasingly limited alternatives.
If we attempt this,
She said finally, emphasis on the conditional suggesting reluctant consideration rather than enthusiastic support.
we would need perfect execution. The suspension formula, monitoring to prevent crossing the permanent threshold, the revival elixir prepared in advance.
All documented in Ashbrand's research.
Lyra confirmed, retrieving another text from her private collection. A slender volume bound in dark leather that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the morning light.
Where did you get that?
Zara asked, eyes widening as she recognized the distinctive binding.
Ashbrand's personal grimoire was supposedly destroyed during the purification fires.
My mother preserved it.
Lyra replied simply, the admission revealing more about her family's complex relationship with guild orthodoxy than any lengthy explanation could have provided.
Along with other texts, the Council of Elders deemed too dangerous for general access.
She opened the grimoire carefully, its pages covered with precise formulations in Ashbrand's distinctive handwriting. Recipes for potions that walked the boundary between life and death with unsettling precision.
Everything we need is here, including the suspension formula and revival elixir.
Zara studied the first page with growing concern.
These ingredients, some are extremely rare. Midnight ember root, spectral ash. Where would we even...
I have them,
Lyra interrupted quietly.
or access to them at least. My mother's collection remains intact in a hidden compartment beneath my father's study.
Another revelation that suggested deeper currents beneath the Embersong family's public adherence to guild tradition. Serena Embersong's legacy, it seemed, extended beyond the portrait Lyra kept locked away. A heritage of quiet rebellion against arbitrary limitations that had found expression in her daughter's similar inclinations.
Even with perfect execution,
Zara said after studying the formulations more carefully,
this plan addresses only the necklace itself. Alek would still pursue you once he discovered you survived the binding's release.
Which is why we need a more permanent solution to that particular problem.
Lyra agreed, her expression shifting to something harder, more resolved than her friend had perhaps ever witnessed.
I need to die more publicly and permanently, at least as far as Alek is concerned.
What are you suggesting?
Zara asked, though her tone suggested she already anticipated the answer.
Illusion,
Lyra stated simply.
my specialty, as you well know. A public death spectacular enough to convince even Alek of its authenticity, particularly if it leaves behind physical evidence he can examine.
The necklace itself,
Zara realized, understanding dawning as she followed Lyra's reasoning.
if he finds it abandoned after witnessing your apparent death.
Exactly.
Lyra moved to the window, gazing out over Pyreholm's morning activity with calculated assessment.
The Fire Guild values tangible evidence above all else. Physical remains would provide irrefutable proof of genuine death, rather than illusory deception.
But Alek knows your reputation as an illusionist.
Zara countered.
Why would he accept even the most convincing display without suspicion?
Lyra turned back from the window, a grim smile playing at the corners of her mouth.
Because the method of my demise will exploit his greatest fear and most closely guarded secret. The entity's true nature.
Understanding dawned in Zara's eyes.
You're going to make it appear as though the Ifrit escaped and consumed you.
A fitting end for a binding gone terribly wrong.
Lyra confirmed.
The necklace's enchantment breaking containment and devouring its wearer in spectacular fashion. Something even Alek would find plausible given what we now know about Ifrit bargains.
The plan took shape between them with increasing clarity. Temporary death to remove the physical binding, followed by illusory public death to escape Alek's continued pursuit. Each element presenting significant risk, yet together forming a coherent strategy where previously only desperate fragments had existed.
We would need to move quickly once the necklace was removed.
Zara observed, practical considerations engaging as she mentally mapped required steps.
The suspension formula's effects would provide a limited window for staging the public death before revival became necessary.
Which is why proper timing is essential.
Lyra agreed.
The marketplace at midday provides the optimal setting, maximum witnesses, natural pathways for retreat, and sufficient ambient fire magic to support complex illusory working.
As morning advanced toward midday, they refined their desperate plan with methodical precision, Zara applying her practical expertise to logistics, while Lyra extracted key formulations from Ashbrand's grimoire. The suspension potion required careful preparation, its ingredients combined in precise sequence with magical infusion at critical junctures.
Are you certain about this?
Zara asked as they completed the final preparations, her voice quiet with concern that transcended practical considerations.
Once begun, this path allows no easy return to your previous life.
Lyra paused in her work, truly considering the question rather than dismissing it with hasty assurance. The plan would sever her from her father, her position, her carefully constructed future, everything she had been raised to value and protect. Yet measured against continued subjugation to Alek's influence, against the entity's persistent threat, against the glimpse of authentic connection she had experienced with Cassius.
I'm certain,
She replied finally, the simple words carrying weight beyond their syllables.
some cages become visible only when you glimpse possibility beyond their bars.
Something in her expression must have conveyed the depth of this certainty, for Zara nodded once, acceptance replacing concern as she recognized the fundamental shift in her friend's orientation to her own life.
Then let's ensure you have a future to claim beyond those bars.
She said, returning to practical preparations with renewed focus. By mid-morning, the suspension potion sat completed, a delicate liquid that shifted between silver and crimson as light passed through its carefully balanced components. Beside it, the revival elixir glowed with subtle amber luminescence, its properties precisely calibrated to reverse death's advance at a specific threshold.
The suspension will take effect within moments of consumption.
Lyra explained, reviewing Ashbrand's notes one final time.
Complete cessation of detectable life signs, while maintaining minimal soul tether to physical form. The binding should release immediately once death threshold is crossed.
At which point I remove the necklace,
Zara confirmed,
and administer the revival elixir after no more than 7 minutes. Any longer risks permanent separation between soul and body.
Exactly.
Lyra agreed, closing the grimoire with careful finality.
Once revived, we'll have approximately 1 hour before Alek would expect to sense the binding's dissolution and investigate its cause.
During which we stage your public death and establish a secure retreat location.
Zara concluded, her expression reflecting both determination and lingering concern about their plan's numerous potential failure points. Lyra placed her hand over her friend's, the gesture conveying gratitude beyond words for unwavering support in the face of such a dangerous undertaking.
If this succeeds, I'll need to disappear completely until we can address the larger threat Alek poses to the guild.
The ancient catacombs beneath old Pyreholm,
Zara suggested.
The tunnels extend beyond current mapping, with access points forgotten by all but the most dedicated historians. My mother documented several during her boundary studies.
Another piece of their desperate plan falling into place. A secure location beyond Alek's likely search parameters, yet accessible enough for continued coordination as they worked toward a more permanent resolution. As midday approached, the final preparations were completed. Lyra changed into simple garments beneath her formal outer robe, clothing that would allow inconspicuous movement following the planned spectacle. The market illusion had been meticulously choreographed in her mind, each element designed for maximum impact while minimizing actual energy expenditure. They stood before each other in the tower room that had witnessed so many pivotal moments in their shared history. Childhood confidences, adolescent dreams, adult compromises, and now this desperate bid for freedom that might cost everything yet promised possibility beyond current constraints.
If this fails,
Zara began, unable to complete the thought aloud.
It won't.
Lyra replied with confidence she didn't entirely feel yet projected for both their benefit.
But if complications arise, you must prioritize your own safety. Your position within the guild could prove essential to opposing whatever larger plan Alek has set in motion with the incomplete crown.
Zara's expression hardened with uncharacteristic intensity.
don't ask me to abandon you if things go wrong.
I'm asking you to make a strategic decision rather than an emotional one.
Lyra clarified gently.
My father will need allies he can trust if Alek's influence continues expanding. You may be the only one positioned to provide that support.
The pragmatic argument succeeded where emotional appeal might have failed. Zara's tactical mind recognizing the strategic necessity despite personal reluctance. She nodded once, acceptance rather than agreement, before retrieving the suspension potion from Lyra's research table.
It's time?
She said simply, offering the delicate vial with a steady hand that belied the gravity of what they were about to attempt. Lyra accepted it with matching composure, studying the shifting liquid for a final moment of consideration before commitment. The moon opal pulsed once in her pocket, a gentle reminder of the connection maintained across distance, of possibility glimpsed beyond current constraints, of reason transcending mere escape.
For freedom beyond simple absence of chains,
She murmured, raising the vial in toast to a possibility rather than merely against confinement. Then, with deliberate finality, she consumed the suspension potion in a single swallow. The effect began immediately, a cool sensation spreading from her core outward with methodical precision. Not painful exactly, but fundamentally unsettling as life processes began orderly cessation rather than chaotic failure. Her heartbeat slowed with each passing second, respiration growing shallow, then stopping entirely as suspension claimed vital functions one by one. Consciousness persisted longer than expected, allowing her to observe Zara's increasingly concerned expression as the death threshold approached with inexorable precision. A final thought before darkness claimed her awareness centered not on fear or regret, but on unexpected appreciation for clarity that only such a radical threshold could provide. Perspective impossible from safely within life's comfortable boundaries. Then darkness. Complete stillness beyond experience, beyond description, beyond memory's capacity to fully capture upon return. Not emptiness exactly, but absence so profound it transcended conventional understanding of void itself. Time lost meaning. Existence narrowed to singular awareness without physical tether or emotional context. Until a sudden, violent return, sensation flooding back with overwhelming intensity as the revival elixir forced life processes to resume their interrupted functions. Gasping breath, racing heartbeat, nerves firing with chaotic urgency as the suspension released its temporary claim on mortality.
Lyra, can you hear me?
Zara's voice penetrated returning awareness, concern evident in its heightened pitch. Lyra forced heavy eyelids open, vision gradually resolving to reveal her friend's worried face hovering above her. Something had changed. A subtle but fundamental difference in how the world presented itself to her renewed perception. The necklace was gone. Her hand rose automatically to her throat, fingers confirming what awareness had already registered. Bare skin where the binding had previously rested. Freedom purchased through temporary surrender of life itself. Chains broken through death's brief claim on what they had sought to control.
It worked.
She managed, her voice rough from suspension's effects on vocal mechanisms.
How long was I...
5 minutes, 17 seconds.
Zara reported with precise relief, helping her to a sitting position with careful support.
The binding released almost immediately once your life signs ceased. I've secured the necklace in a containment box warded with every protection I could manage.
Lyra nodded, gradually regaining full control of restored physical functions. The experience had changed something within her. Her perspective shifted through proximity to death's absolute boundary. What had previously seemed insurmountable obstacles now appeared merely as challenges requiring appropriate response. Fear replaced by clarity regarding what truly mattered beyond arbitrary limitations.
We need to move quickly,
she said, rising with Zara's assistance.
The marketplace illusion must be executed before Alek senses the binding's dissolution and investigates.
Her strength returned with surprising rapidity. Ashbrand's precisely calibrated revival elixir performing exactly as documented in restoring full function without lingering impairment. Within minutes, she had completed the final preparations for the public spectacle that would cement her apparent death in witnesses' memories while providing opportunity for actual escape. The moon opal pulsed once in her pocket as they prepared to depart the tower. A reminder of connection maintained, despite all that had occurred and was yet to come. Lyra touched it briefly, drawing comfort from its cool presence, so different from the necklace's invasive heat.
I'll send word once you're safely established in the catacombs,
Zara promised as they reached the tower's exit.
and maintain connection with Cassius through established channels.
Lyra nodded, gratitude beyond words for friendship that transcended conventional loyalty to risk everything for her freedom.
Be careful of Alek's response once he discovers the tragedy. His grief will be performance concealing rage at having lost his prize.
I know how to navigate political currents.
Zara assured her with grim confidence.
Focus on your performance now and leave the aftermath to me.
They separated at the tower's base, taking different paths toward the marketplace where Lyra's carefully choreographed death would soon occur. The plan required precise timing. Her arrival establishing visible presence among witnesses, followed by the staged encounter with the Ifrit. Pyreholm's central marketplace bustled with midday activity. Merchants hawking wares, guild apprentices running errands, citizens gathering for community connection that transcended mere commercial exchange. Lyra moved through this familiar chaos with deliberate visibility, exchanging greetings with acquaintances while positioning herself near the central fountain where visibility would be optimal for what followed. Lyra arrived near the central fountain, the necklace discreetly held in her hands as she pretended to examine the fountain. Several nearby merchants observed her movements, providing necessary witnesses for what would follow. Her calculated expression suggested innocent curiosity rather than predetermined intent, maintaining the narrative that would explain her death as an unfortunate accident rather than coordinated deception. The illusory working had been prepared in her mind with meticulous precision. Complex flame manipulation designed to suggest catastrophic release of a contained entity rather than controlled magical performance. As her hands touched the fountain, she triggered the prepared sequence. Subtle at first, building toward a spectacular conclusion that would leave no apparent doubt regarding her fate. Wisps of smoke emerged from around her neck, gradually intensifying into tendrils that wrapped around her wrists with apparent volition. Her expression shifted to appropriate alarm, drawing additional attention from marketplace witnesses as the manifestation expanded. Crimson flame erupted from around her neck, forming a vaguely humanoid shape with a horned head and burning eyes. A perfect replica of the entity she had encountered within the necklace's domain.
No!
She cried, the performative fear-carrying conviction born from genuine memory of the entity's terrifying presence.
Contain it! Someone help!
The illusory Ifrit grew larger, its flaming form expanding to tower over her with menacing intensity. Marketplace observers retreated in alarm, some shouting for guild guards while others fled the apparently dangerous manifestation. Precisely the chaotic response required to cover her actual escape once the final sequence concluded.
You are mine!
The illusion roared in perfect replication of the entity's voice, the sound carrying across the marketplace with bone-chilling resonance.
Your soul belongs to me!
With dramatic flourish, the fiery manifestation engulfed Lyra's form completely, flames appearing to consume her while she maintained a small pocket of protection at its center. Her agonized scream cut off with terrible abruptness, the sound lingering in witnesses' ears as the flames intensified to blinding brilliance before collapsing inward with thunderous implosion. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained but scorched stone, the remnants of her outer robe, and the necklace itself. Fire opals glinting innocently in sunlight, as if they hadn't just apparently consumed their wearer in spectacular fashion. Beneath the marketplace, Lyra moved swiftly through maintenance tunnels she had memorized during years of exploring Pyreholm's less-traveled passages. The illusion had succeeded perfectly, complex but contained, convincing without requiring excessive magical energy that might have revealed its artificial nature to trained observers. By the time guild investigators arrived, she would be deep within the ancient catacombs where Zara would join her once the initial chaos had subsided. The narrow passage eventually opened into older tunnels, remnants of the original settlement that had preceded modern Pyreholm's construction. These ancient corridors, forgotten by most current residents, extended beyond official mapping into a labyrinthine complexity that would provide a perfect sanctuary while they developed more permanent solutions to the threats still facing them. Lyra paused at a junction where carved symbols marked transition into a truly ancient section. Taking a moment to fully appreciate what had been accomplished and what remained yet to do. Physical freedom from the necklace represented a significant victory. Yet Alek's larger scheme with the incomplete crown still threatened both guild and the broader magical balance the ancestors had warned against. The moon opal pulsed gently in her pocket, its cool energy providing comfort as she prepared to descend into temporary exile beneath the city she had always called home. Not permanent liberation, but an essential first step. Death and rebirth, creating possibility where previously only constraint had existed.
This isn't over.
She whispered to the distant awareness she imagined connected through the stone.
But it has begun.
With that acknowledgement of both progress made and challenges remaining, Lyra Embersong, officially deceased yet newly determined, descended into ancient darkness that would shelter her transformation from political pawn to active agent in her own destiny. From object of others' schemes to architect of alternate possibilities. Above, Pyreholm erupted in chaos as news of the High Councilor's daughter's spectacular death spread through a stunned population. Guild investigators swarmed the marketplace, collecting evidence including the apparently cursed necklace for careful examination. Witnesses recounted the terrifying manifestation with increasing embellishment. The event already transforming from actual observation to mythic narrative in collective retelling. And in his private chambers, Alek Brightforge received the news with the expression of appropriate shock and grief that concealed calculating rage beneath its convincing exterior. His golden eyes studied the messenger with an intensity that made the young guild apprentice shift uncomfortably, unaware of the furious calculation occurring behind that apparently grief-stricken gaze.
A terrible tragedy,
He said finally, his voice perfectly modulated to suggest emotional control, maintained through significant effort.
I must see the evidence myself. Bring me to where it happened.
As the messenger led him toward the marketplace where investigators still worked, Alek's mind raced through possibilities, analyzing reported details against known capabilities, assessing likelihood of genuine catastrophe versus elaborate deception. His betrothed had been an accomplished illusionist, yes, but the necklace's binding should have prevented any working directly against his interests, unless something, or someone, had interfered with that binding in ways he hadn't anticipated. This possibility narrowed his golden eyes as he approached the scorched stone where Lyra Embersong had apparently met her spectacular end. The investigation would require meticulous attention, not merely to confirm her death, but to identify whatever external influence might have disrupted his carefully constructed plans. The game had changed, pieces rearranged by an unexpected move. But the crown's completion remained his ultimate objective. With or without the Embersong girls' direct participation, contingencies existed for every setback, alternatives for every potential obstacle. Even death could serve his purpose, if properly leveraged.